John Hayden, I live in Port Angeles. One of the largest problems that our justice system, both locally and statewide, is facing right now comes at the intersection of the mental health system and the criminal courts. At any time, upwards of 10% of our local jail population is comprised of people who are waiting to be evaluated for competency, or who have been evaluated, found incompetent, and are waiting for much needed treatment. That's turned our jail essentially into a de facto mental health institution. This has happened because, frankly, Western State Hospital is broken. What, if anything, can be done to fix that?
All right. Mr. McEntire, you'll begin.
John, I couldn't agree with you more. And our good sheriff here says he operates not a jail, but a mental health facility in large part. And I agree with that. Mental health funding comes from the state budget. That's the next big thing that the legislature is going to have to address. The governor has an intriguing idea about creating a regionalized system of mental health care, regional centers, small 16 and below beds for inpatient treatment and the like. That's something that really should be seriously looked at, I believe. There are 4 things that the legislature has to spend money on before everything else. Those are pension. Okay, sorry. I'll get to that next.
This is a huge issue. We're in the state's in a court case with the Disabilities Association of Washington for our Western State Hospital for just this issue for forensic holds, for evaluations. It's costing us about $2 to $3 million a month. And so we will be dealing with this issue just as we've dealt with McCleary and education for the last 2 bienniums. This will be a biennium that really deals with mental health. I met last week with the hospital and both the staff and actually the police chief from Port Angeles, Eric Lewis, about this issue, and maybe if we can, and also I talked with Mike Glenn down at Jefferson Mental Health about trying to get a transitional facility. As capital budget chair, it's odd, but it seemed odd to me, but no capital budget chair before me had really talked to the operating side around mental health or early learning or long-term care, some of these things. But we're starting to meld those two, so there'll be capital investments and operating investments to address this issue before we leave this session.
And thank you for sticking to your time. Mr. McEntire, you have 30 seconds.
I'll just try to finish my thought. The top 4 things that must flow from the state treasury are contributions to the rainy day fund, service on the state debt, both interest and principal, K through 12 education, and staying true to our pension obligations for those state and local employees that participate. Number 5, I think, is mental health, and so that's my set of priorities.
The key to this, or one of the keys, is it's expensive and not a good place to have someone in jail when they have mental health issues. Same with the ER. So the more we can get upstream, and Port Angeles is doing a really good job. Chief Smith has hired a social worker that goes around with the patrol car and tries to connect that person with the services that they need before they end up in jail, before they end up in the ER. And that's what we need to do, is we need to start looking at treatment and getting as far upstream as we can to avoid these expensive places like the ER and the jail or what's happening in Western.
All right, Ms. Wilke.
This actually is a really deep passion of mine. Being a nurse, I've worked in long-term care, and we've had a lot of people with mental illnesses, and that's exactly what happens to them. If they become violent or out of control in the facilities, they end up in the emergency room. Often we have to call the police, and they're turfed there until they can get a bed somewhere else, which is generally not available. They can end up there for months. It's a really bad problem. My biggest question is, why has the state budget spending gone up 45% in the last 5 years, and we haven't been able to tackle this issue. So this is a huge problem that we need to actually take a closer look at our spending and what we spend it on, because the pensions with the McCleary fix are going to go up with the increase in salaries for the teachers, and that's going to put even a greater stress on our budget. And another thing that's super important in getting upstream of the mental illness problem is to offer services to high school and younger age kids.
All right, Mr. Chapman.
One of the reasons the state budget has gone up is we put $8 billion of new money into your public education. One of the shortfalls is we have not fully funded school counselors, mental health counselors for students. If you really want to address, if you're serious about addressing mental health, go into a school like I have, talk to a mental health counselor who has multiple schools, listen to the issues they're dealing with, from kindergartners to first graders to second graders. Was recently traveling with someone to a meeting. He got a text from his wife. His daughter was threatened by another student, and in a violent way. He was replying, and I was making the assumption. I said, "What high school does she go to?" And he said, "She's in kindergarten." So, a lot of issues. $8 billion of new money, which is one reason why the state budget is certainly higher. But that is a high priority for me, is to fund those mental health counselors for schools, for students.
All right, Ms. Wilke, would you like 30 seconds more?
Sure, yeah. Sure, you kind of stole my story there. And that's okay, because there's stories like that all over. I just got one in Forks the other day. I was out there talking to the high schoolers, and that was one of the big issues that they were concerned about was, and the teacher told me that for every one counselor, they've got something like 1,300 students that they need to deal with as far as mental health counseling, and that's totally unacceptable to me. So I would encourage that. And I also do like the idea of the smaller facilities as proposed.
One other rebuttal, I think, Steve, you were in the legislature when the legislature had a bill to address mental health, and for some reason the governor vetoed it. So I think that's an issue. The legislature's certainly been wrestling with that. That bill was vetoed, so it's really imperative now for the governor to help the legislature. What does he want to do? And it sounds like he's engaging a little more. The other thing is, this probably would have been a great topic for a special session, separate session dealing with mental health, school safety, school counselors. And I think sometimes we get so locked into, we had a short session, 60 days, we got to get done, we got to get back out on the campaign trail. I gladly would have suspended, no disrespect, but I gladly would have suspended coming to forums if we were in the legislature dealing with these issues. So sometimes I think we should have some special sessions for one topic, short term, that are really important to the state.
All right, next question.
Okay. My question refers to the Dungeness Off-Channel Reservoir, the project, and my question has 3 parts. Number 1, funding. What are some possible funding sources and how would you advocate for them? Number 2, a timeline. When do you think this could happen? And number 3, the priority. With all the complexities of your jobs and the issues before you, is this project on your priority list? High, medium, or low? And this would just be for Steve Tharinger and Jim McEntire. Thank you.
All right, yeah.
So folks, this is, I think, the final piece in the water management facilities, if you will, for the Dungeness River system. And it's the DNR owns the land, and the county wants to buy the land. I've had it in the budget the last 3 years, and I thought we were going to get it done this year. It's about $2.5 million to make the transfer from the DNR to the county, because you have to keep the trusts whole in the DNR land. The governor's, because we put in the whole HRSA solution, we put $300 million to water resiliency and water resources. So I was going to use that money, because this is a great example of how that money should be spent, in my view. But this was kind of a spat between the legislative branch and the executive branch. They wanted us to give them the money, and then they were going to figure out how to spend it. Well, fast forward, I think we're going to get that transfer funded now. I think it should be funded by the end of the year because it was a second tranche of funding. So that transfer will happen. Once that transfer happens and the county's the agent, then they can go out and get other additional grants. And I suspect the capital budget or this water resource fund will be part of the solution to that. I think the total project is somewhere, it's coming down, but I think it's around $20 million.
All right, Mr. McEntire?
I'd certainly be interested to know how similar efforts undertaken in the past have resulted in more fish habitat and more fish in the rivers. And I certainly think that we should try to improve habitat where it makes sense and where it's cost effective. But it is certainly a part of the picture, as are hatcheries and things of similar natures. Aquaculture is something that we can do here if we do it responsibly and well with native species, not species that are imported into the area and that sort of thing. So yeah, I would be a supporter of that effort to kind of close the gap in funding, whatever may exist. My impression was that it had been pretty much fully funded already.
All right.
So, as the Dungeness is and the collaborative effort that's gone on there over the last 30 years is a leading effort in the state. As I travel around the state, having worked on the Dungeness and been chair of the Dungeness River Management Team and worked on a number of these issues, I just kind of thought everybody in the state did work like that, where the tribes get together, the agricultural community gets together, and the development community gets together, and they figure it out. That is not the case. So this is an example, one of the best examples in the state of solving this very challenging issue of water resources for all the needs that are out there. So it's important to support it.
Mr. McEntire, would you like 30 seconds? All right. We're ready for our next question.
Okay. Hi, I'm Jim Stauffer. I'm a Sequim School Board Director, and I serve at the state level on the Legislative Committee and Trust Lands Advisory Committee. So we appreciate all the work that our fellow elected officials do. So if you find yourself back in Olympia after November 6th, you're going to be facing 4 buckets of requests from the WASDA. One of those is ensuring student health and safety. The other one is invest in public school facilities, and then promote school success, and then increase funding equity. And the question is, how will you partner with your local school board directors and the school board directors throughout the state on these vital, important issues? Thank you. That's for all.
We'll start with Mr. Chapman. I assume that question was for everybody, sir?
Yes.
All right.
Well, first of all, I think we should, Jim, you and Cindy Kelly are certainly taking statewide leadership roles on this issue of advocating for school construction funds from the timber dollars, from timber revenue. You did a great, I don't want to take all my time praising you but I should, because honestly I don't think people realize how much Jim has put into this issue of making sure that local school districts get access to their timber dollars to keep your local costs. Just one highlight, that's something that I've actually been surprised, this has not come up in any of our debates, the issue of should we lower the threshold from 60% to build new schools. We've seen community school bonds go down with 58, 59%. Should any of us get 58 or 59%, we will think we had a mandate, but you can't build a new school. So I certainly support lowering that threshold. It looks like the consensus, the bipartisan consensus in Olympia is maybe you'd have a bill that would lower the threshold to 55% with the election in the November election. So I think that would be a great start. And your work on the timber revenue is certainly something that you should talk a little bit more about.
Ms. Wilke?
Okay, you had 4 different items there, and I'm going to try to touch a little bit on each one of them. First of all, I will state that if we can improve access to monies from timber dollars, I would be all for that, because that will help not only the schools, but it will also help the local communities and jobs, especially places that are so reliant on those timber dollars. Student health and we touched a little bit on student mental health issues is something that I would definitely get behind. And we need to have more counselors available to the schools and maybe take a look at per capita funding that might make it a little bit more equitable for the rural schools to get the money that they actually need to have. And that also touches on the funding equity issue. And school success is a big concern for all of us. It does seem from the layperson's point of view that we continue to put more and more money into schools, and yet the results don't seem to be quite what we want. And I'm going to have to leave it there.
A couple of other, since we're talking about schools, I co-sponsored a piece of legislation, House Bill 1703. It would be a comprehensive school safety planning grant. I think one of the things parents need to realize is some of these schools are so old that we're putting our kids at risk, and so we need school districts to do a needs assessment. I think that's one of the ways you can build support for bonds and new school construction, is that get the parents upset that they're putting their kids in some of these structures are substandard. The work we did in SQUIM, that Steve did in SQUIM actually, with the cross-laminated timber panels and classrooms, is a great example of new school construction, affordable, safe, and earthquake resistant.
Thank you. Ms. Wilke?
I think one way that we can keep school costs down also, if we are going to have such a school safety planning and general requirements for each of the schools, is if we take a look at making some standardized school designs so that we don't have to continue to reinvent the wheel every time we build a school. That might allow us to keep some of the engineering costs down and use that money for something else. That would be much better. Just an idea.
All right, Mr. McEntire?
I'm going to spend a minute on school construction. To have timber revenues coming to the state budget and to local school districts, you have to have timber harvest. That's a necessary and sufficient condition to provide non-taxpayer funds. And I'm going to have to recognize Port Angeles Business Association, in addition to Jim and Cindy, who the PABA really shone a spotlight on this thing early on. And you certainly have done great work to try to reconfigure OSPI rules so that you can get the money that's owed to you. What we need to really look at, I think, in my opponent's budget in his committee, is reconfiguring the formula for state assistance to local school construction. Right now, the formula in effect discriminates against tax-poor school districts that can't pass construction levies or bond levies. And so I think that's a situation that needs to be reversed. And I think a far greater percentage of the capital budget can come to local school districts for construction purposes to take some pressure off of local taxpayers, property taxpayers.
All right, Mr. Tharinger?
Well, it's great that our opponents here accept this idea, because we set up a task force, the capital budget, as chair of the capital budget, we set up a working group to look at the School Construction Assistance Program, SCAP. And partly because we have, in the capital budget, we have no way to control the exposure to the state on how many, when a bond passes, we basically are on the hook for about 30% of that bond. And during the recession, there weren't many bonds passing. Since the recession, there's been about $6 billion worth of school construction bonds. So we're building into our budget. We spent about 1.2, 1.5 billion this year in this biennial budget, with another 80 million in the supplemental. So we need to get a better formula and a better, and I think prototypical schools, capital asset models would be a good way to do this. And that task force has met twice, and they met today, and are working on this issue, and we hopefully will have something back before we go into session that we can look at to sort of manage school construction. I know that doesn't touch the other three issues Jim brought up, but
All right, Mr. McEntire, would you like another 30 seconds?
Nothing to rebut, but that work on the construction assistance formula is long overdue. That should have happened a long time ago. But let's talk about school safety for a minute. You know, ensuring the safety of the school campus, I think, is in the province and should be in the province of the locally elected school boards, but it certainly needs some assistance from the state. School resource officers, some professional security person that could be on site or on campus, I think would be something that the legislature could and should do. Okay, that's it.
Just want to touch briefly on the equity issue. As folks know, the court case, the clearing made us provide equity as much as we could around the 295 school districts. Just imagine, just here on the peninsula, the difference between Port Angeles and Sequim and Port Townsend and Fort. That's a challenge. So the way we did that is we took away the levies and tried to level that. And as Mike mentioned earlier, we put $8 billion into K-12 education over the last couple of years. So I don't think we have that formula right yet. Some of the levies, there's going to be a cliff, particularly in Port Angeles. Sequim is not as exposed. The regionalization piece is challenging, and then special ed is another big challenge. So I think we're going to have to do some more work on education. It's our paramount duty, so we're just used to doing it.
All right, this will be our last question.
Okay. My question is concerning, I'm Deborah Pitt, my question is concerning I-1631. One part of the initiative states, and I quote, "The Department of Agriculture shall develop proposed procedures, criteria, and rules for a program to increase soil sequestration and reduce emissions from the loss and disturbance of soils, including the conversion of grassland and cropland soils to urban development." Are you comfortable with revenues from this initiative going to severely restricting housing development?
All right, Mr. Tharinger, you'll start.
So just a brief primer on development. And as a commissioner dealing with land use and being on the planning commission, for every dollar you bring in from a development, it costs you about $1.50 in services. For every dollar you have on resource lands, it costs you about 98 cents. So it makes sense to manage your growth. If you're going to provide infrastructure, transportation, sewer, water, broadband, it makes sense to concentrate that. We talked earlier about timber sequestration, and the science is starting to show soil sequestration. And so as folks know, the oceans are absorbing most of our carbon right now. We can't grow shellfish here in Washington. They don't have enough calcium to be able to form that shell. So we need to address this. So I think being smart about how we manage our growth and using our resource lands to sequester carbon is a good strategy, both for us here in timber country and in agricultural areas.
Well, just overall on that initiative, the tax implications of it, it's called a fee, but it's really a tax. Fee, tax, doesn't matter. The effect is the same. It's going to increase the cost of fuel. It's going to increase the cost of the goods that we buy in all of our stores because they have to be transported here by truck. So it's going to have an impact on the cost of living. And so for that reason alone, and I've talked about the economy and the difficulties that our working families are already having and seniors on fixed income, I'm against the initiative. The funding mechanism in the initiative itself is really kind of odd. There's a constitutional requirement that any and all spending by state government has to be authorized through an appropriation by the legislature. In other words, a group can't just write themselves money in an initiative, which is what seems to be happening with this one.
So just in general terms on the carbon issue and the global warming, Mother Nature does not care whether we live on this planet. It's not her duty to create an ecosystem that supports us. So we may be hesitant to pay taxes or fees. We may not want to limit land for housing. Mother Nature does not care about that. Mother Nature has sequestered for millennium carbon, and we've released it. And it is damaging our ecosystem. And if we don't get smart, and we're supposed to be the thinking animal, to figure out a solution to this, we won't be around.
All right. Mr. Chapman?
If the choice, and I misunderstood your question earlier, so I truly want to get this one right. If the choice is preserving farmland and allowing farmers to keep their land in farming land or turning it into development, I will support farmers, I will support farmland, I will support the ability to grow crops here locally every day of the week.
This is a complex topic, and just backing it up to the idea of a carbon fee or a carbon tax is where I'd like to start with this. I don't support the carbon tax because I know the effect that that's going to have on our rural area out here. We are in a position right now to be sequestering a lot of this carbon, and we're not creating it. Yet we are going to be penalized by other parts of the state and other places around the world which do this. Now, I think it really depends upon which model you look at as to whether or not humans are to cause, or humans are to blame for the cause of global warming. We know that this has happened over the history of the Earth. And, you know, if a volcano goes off, it releases a whole lot of carbon, just like forest fires do. I think that we could do better on reviewing our scientific models before we start to put the pressure on people.
Did you like more time? All right. Thank you, everyone, and thank you to our audience for your... Yes, I'm leading up to that.
Microphone.
I'm leading up to that. Thank you to our panelists, and thank you to the audience for your excellent questions. To end this panel, we'll now move to our candidates' 2-minute closing statements, and we'll reverse the order from the opening statements, and we will begin with Ms. Wilke.
So thank you very much for the honor of running as a candidate for District 24 representative. I really do hope that you will vote for me. I ask for your vote. I will bring a breath of fresh air into this legislature, somebody who has not been a career politician, who doesn't have the politic-speak and that sort of thing. I really am looking out for the people in this district, and I've spent an incredible amount of time going around talking to people, finding out what's important to you. I think that myself and my opponent couldn't be more different, especially when you consider the initiatives. I think each of us are both on either side of those initiatives. For the 1639 gun ban, I would vote no against that. For the 1631 carbon tax, I have also stated that I would vote no against that. I would support our police officers by voting no against the 940, which would handcuff the police officers and create a situation where they have to make a decision in cases of deadly force as to whether or not they're going to end up getting sued rather than protecting themselves and the people around them. And I think that's a terrible position to put our police officers in. And I would also vote yes to ban the grocery tax because I know how much that's going to affect our rural and our poorer people. One thing that I would like to see happen is that in all income levels in this district, our district is between 20 and 30 cents poorer. That doesn't make any sense considering how prosperous the rest of our state has been. Having a prosperous district is going to trickle down to a lot of, and I hate to use that term because it's kind of been overused, but it will affect the hope that everybody has, whether you're a senior or whether you're a kid going to school watching the success of your parents. It gives you hope for the future. It inspires people. It gives people an idea that they can do something good with their lives. And if I can lead a movement like that, I would be honored.
Thank you.
I would also oppose capital gains tax.
Mr. Chapman?
That'll help the seniors.
Hey, again, thanks for everyone. It's been a long night. Really appreciate everyone for being here. I've just been your representative for 2 years, and here's what I'm proud of. I'm proud to have been part of a legislator that became the first state in the nation to protect your net neutrality. I'm proud to be part of a legislature that in a 98-0 vote in the House and 48-0 in the Senate, we passed House Bill 2097 protecting religious affiliation from disclosure to your federal government. I'm proud to be part of a legislature that increased the pediatrician Medicaid reimbursement rate, which will allow the pediatrician that was going to leave Grays Harbor County to maintain an office in Grays Harbor County to serve kids in Grays Harbor County. Proud to be part of a legislature that funded rural hospitals. I'm proud to be part of a legislature that passed the Salish Sea Protection Act, expanding funding for oil spill prevention and enacting a per barrel tax on oil as it moves through our Salish Sea, a once-in-a-generational opportunity to protect the Salish Sea, and I'm proud to be part of a legislature that passed that. I'm proud to be part of a legislature that for the first time since 1943, earlier this year, updated the Equal Pay for Women Act. Had not been updated since 1943. Equal pay protections for women. I'm really proud that we were able to pass that. I'm also proud that we passed the Reproductive Parity Act, improving access to women's health care in Washington State. I'm proud to be part of a legislature that also approved a budget proviso to increase child care in Jefferson County. I'm proud to have been part of a legislature that earlier this year cut your property taxes 30 cents per thousand while still being able to put $1 billion in the rainy day fund and getting out in a 60-day session on day 59 in 9 hours and 22 minutes. I'm proud to have served you for 16 years as a county commissioner. I'm proud to continue to serve you as your state legislator. Would love to go back and continue to work on the issues we talked a little bit about tonight. And finally, I'm proud to work for a state government that in this polarized world, we had 18 partisan votes in a short session. And we had 556 bipartisan votes off the House floor. We are a government that works well together. We're functional. We don't fuss. We don't fight. We got all of that done in 60 days while cutting your taxes. 556 bipartisan votes to 18 partisan votes. I'm proud to be part of that team, and I'd love to have your support again.
All right, Mr. McEntire?
Well, you've heard me talk about the economy. We've touched on a broad range of subjects and topics tonight, all of which are important. But I really do believe you need a legislative delegation that understands the facts of what's going on in our economy in our 24th legislative district. Let me just leave you with one further statistic. If you look at the GDP numbers for the 3 counties that comprise the 24th legislative district, you adjust those for inflation, our economy has actually shrunk by a little over 6%. One other statistic, there are 2,200 fewer people drawing a paycheck that are wage earners, not salary wage earners. Those two things indicate to me that we are not paying nearly enough attention at the state level where policy is made that affects the economy both positively and negatively. And we need to reverse that. We need to pay attention to rural Washington, in particular the 24th legislative district. And you know my history here in elective office. That has been my focus from day one when I took office as a port commissioner and until 8 years later when I left office as a county commissioner. That's what you need from your legislative delegation, and I think I'm well equipped with over 46 years of service to our country to accomplish that on the behalf of all of us, working families, seniors, businesses, nonprofits, and the like. So I really thank you, the League, for putting on this forum this evening. It's been illustrative and informative. You have a pretty clear choice. when you get your ballots, which you probably already have today. And I would certainly like your support and would like to earn your vote. So thank you again for your kind attention and your questions.
Yeah, I would just add to that, thank you for coming. It's always a good way to learn, and we joke, Mike and I joke about being in the legislature in the representative side where we have to run every 2 years, and that, as opposed to that Senate where they only run every 4. So that keeps us closer to the people. We get to do this more often, and I think there's some value to that. We're getting towards the end of it after a pretty long primary and campaign season, but it's always interesting to be here and do these things. I really want to thank the league for doing that. And the timers, I don't know how the timers do it. You know, they're just looking at that watch, checking out the minute, the 30 seconds, so thank you for doing that. It's been an honor to serve you in the legislature for the last 4 years. I think the hard work I've put in over the last 4 years has positioned me on my committees and with the relationships I've built across the aisle and across the rotunda with the other chamber and with the executive branch to be an effective leader to address the issues that we face, whether it be healthcare, whether it's school construction or school funding, whether it's our natural resource issues, transportation issues, mental health, that huge spectrum of issues. And it takes a while to gain that experience and know how the system works and to build the relationships that can get things done and be successful. And as Mike listed, in 60 days we did a lot. In 120 days, I think we can do some things that really set our economy, stabilize our economy, deal with our mental health issues, deal with this continuing education piece. And we're going to have a lot of natural resource issues because of the orca whales, the carbon initiative, and that we need to deal with for our long-term ability to thrive here on the North Peninsula. So I really appreciate your vote. I guess your ballots came today and you get 3 weeks to decide, and it's been an honor to serve you, and I hope I get that opportunity to do it again. Thank you.
Thank you to all 4 of our candidates up here. We want to thank you for appearing this evening. I hope you can remain afterwards and visit with audience members. Before we close, I'd like to invite any candidates who are running for any other offices who are in the audience to stand, state your name and the office you're running for. Is there anyone running for an office who might be here tonight?
Mike Doherty, running for County Commissioner, 3rd District. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Doherty. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I want to thank the candidates for running for office and for appearing here this evening. Thanks to our timers and to you, the audience, for your informed questions. Remember, ballots were mailed, and you should have them. Your marked ballot must be placed in a drop box or postmarked no later than November 6th. Ballots now have prepaid postage, so voters do not need to apply a stamp. Please remind your family, friends, and neighbors to cast their votes as well. For those unable to be at our forum, tell them that it can be viewed on our league website, lwvcla.org. For those who have moved since the last election or who need to register, the last day to register online or by mail is past. But Monday, October 29th is the last day to register in person at the Clallam County Auditor's Office. Are you aware that voter turnout at the August primary in Clallam County was less than 50% of registered voters? We all have an equal voice, but only if we vote. I also want to tell you that the League of Women Voters of Washington State has developed a new resource that will help voters make important ballot decisions. Vote411.org is a nonpartisan online voter guide that offers balanced and relevant information on candidates and issues on your ballots. All candidates have been encouraged to post their answers to questions on issues facing their local communities. You can pick up vote411.org bookmarks on the league membership table for further details. We also have These little things, these little things to put on your refrigerator, these little things. Lots of swag, yeah. Please do visit our membership table and consider joining our organization. Donations are also always very welcome, and that's what finances our ability to continue to offer these forums. Also, our state league, the League of Washington States, has provided summaries of the 4 initiatives on the ballot, and copies are available on the table in the lobby. Thank you very much, and good night.